Chudagakian. At Christmas dinner, my ex mocked my fiancé as just a worker. He's useless. My kids laughed. He smiled and BNRTGN 30 PhD Part 1 at Christmas dinner. My ex-husband raised his glass in my own dining room and called my fiancé just a worker. Not quietly, not as a harmless joke. Richard Whitman said it loud enough for my children to hear, loud enough for my grandchildren to stop eating, loud enough for the whole table to understand he meant every word. He fixes outlets and crawls through basements, Richard said, smiling at Tom across the candlelit table. Come on, Eleanor. At your age, you should know better. What is he good for? My fork froze in my hand. The Christmas tree blinked softly in the corner. Snow was falling outside my Cleveland home. The ham was still warm, the mashed potatoes still steaming, and the china on the table had belonged to my mother. My house, my table, my Christmas. And still, for a moment, I felt like a guest in my own life. Then my son Grant laughed. My daughter Melissa looked down first, as if embarrassed, but then she laughed too. Not loudly, just enough. Enough to break something. Tom, my fiancé, did not raise his voice. He did not defend himself. He simply folded his napkin, placed it beside his plate, and looked at Richard. Are you sure you want to say that in front of everyone? He asked. Richard smiled wider. Oh, I'm sure. Someone needs to protect Eleanor from making a foolish mistake. There it was. Foolish. A word Richard had used on me for almost 30 years. Foolish when I trusted people. Emotional when I was hurt. Sensitive when he was cruel. I looked around the table. Melissa avoided my eyes. Grant leaned back with that familiar smirk he had inherited from his father. My grandchildren sat silent, confused by the sudden coldness in the room. Richard continued. Men like him see a woman with a house, savings, a pension, and suddenly they become very attentive. Tom's hand rested near mine under the table. He did not grab it. He simply let me know he was there. Then Richard pointed his fork toward Tom's boots. A man his age still working with his hands, he said. Honestly, Eleanor, he's useless. The room went silent. Tom looked at me, not Richard. Ellie, he said softly. Do you want me to leave this alone? The old me would have said yes. The old me would have smiled through pain and changed the subject to dessert. But I was tired. 64 years old, and finally tired of making cruelty comfortable for everyone else. No, I said. Tom nodded. Then he reached into his coat pocket and placed a plain white envelope on the Christmas table. Then before dessert, he said, Eleanor deserves to know why everyone really came here tonight. Part 2. Before Tom opened that envelope, I need to explain how we reached that table. Betrayal rarely arrives all at once. It starts with small requests. Mom, can you help just this once? Mom, we're a little short this month. Mom, you know family helps family. And if you are a mother like me, you say yes until everyone forgets you were ever allowed to say no. My name is Eleanor Whitman. I divorced Richard at 48 after years of being spoken to like a secretary in my own marriage. He was polished, charming, successful in public, and cold in private. That he missed school concerts, came home late, hid money, and made me feel small for noticing. When the marriage ended, he told everyone we had simply grown apart. That was Richard's gift. He could make abandonment sound civilized. After the divorce, I kept the house. He told me I would never manage the mortgage, repairs, taxes, and bills without him. But I did it. I worked long hours as an office manager at a dental supply company. I refinanced. I clipped coupons. I paid tuition. I helped Melissa through college and helped Grant more times than could count. I told myself that was motherhood. Melissa needed help with a down payment. Grant needed bridge money for a business idea. Melissa needed help with her children's school expenses. Grant needed help with taxes. There was always something. And I helped because I loved them, but love quietly became expectation. Then I met Tom. Thomas Miller came to my house because of a flickering porch light. My neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, gave me his number and said, he's honest, and he won't talk to you like you're helpless. Tom arrived in an old pickup, wearing work boots and carrying a metal toolbox. He explained the problem clearly, gave me a fair price, fixed the light, and swept the porch when he was done. A man who cleans up after himself tells you more than a man who knows how to order expensive wine. Over time, he came back for small repairs. A railing, a basement window, a bad outlet. Then one day he brought soup because I had mentioned I was sick. We became friends first. He listened when I spoke. He remembered things. He never asked what my house was worth. He never treated my age like a weakness. When he proposed 2 years later, he gave me a simple ring and said, "It isn't flashy, but it's honest." That was Tom. Honest. And that was what my family hated most. Not because he was poor. Not because he wore boots. Because after Tom, I started saying no. I asked Grant for paperwork before lending him $40,000. I told Melissa I needed to think before helping with another renovation. I met with an estate attorney named Caroline Mercer. Suddenly, my children became concerned. Richard started calling again, and every concern sounded strangely like control. Part 3. The first time I understood my children were not just worried, but angry, was when Grant called about the $40,000. "It's a temporary cash flow issue," he said. "What is it for?" I asked. "A business opportunity." "Then send me the documents." Silence. Then his voice changed. "Is this coming from Tom?" "No," I said. "It's coming from me." He laughed, sharp and cold. A week later, Melissa called. "Mom, Grant says you're acting strange." "Strange how?" "Like you don't trust us." "Melissa, asking questions before lending $40,000 is not distrust. He's your son, and I'm his mother, not his bank." The line went quiet. That was the first time I said those words out loud. Not his bank. They felt rude. They also felt true. After that, every boundary became proof that Tom was influencing me. Every dollar I did not give became evidence I was pulling away. Every private decision became secrecy. Then I met Caroline Mercer, my attorney. She reviewed my old will and said, "Mrs. Whitman, this document does not reflect the life you're living now." That sentence almost made me cry. The life I was living now, not Richard's life, not my children's expectations. Mind that we discussed a trust, medical directives, power of attorney, and updating beneficiaries. Caroline asked whether my children knew I was there. "No," I said. "Do you want them to?" "Not yet." Somehow, Melissa found out. "Mom," she asked on the phone, too sweetly, "are you changing your will?" "My estate planning is private." "Private from your own children?" "Yes," I said, "until I decide otherwise." That was the moment the family campaign began. Richard called and said, "Eleanor, we all just want what's best for you." Melissa said, "Dad might come to Christmas dinner. He'll be alone." I should have said no, but old habits are stubborn. I thought of the grandchildren. I thought of family pictures. I thought one dinner could not hurt. So I said, "Fine, but he is a guest, not the host." On Christmas Eve, I cooked ham, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce, and 2 pies. Tom came early with ice and bakery pies and asked, "Tell me what to do." Richard arrived last, of course, in a charcoal coat and red scarf. He looked at Tom's boots and smiled. "Mr. Miller." "Richard," Tom said, no handshake. Dinner began politely. Then Richard asked, "Still doing odd jobs, Tom?" Tom said, "I keep busy." Richard smiled. "Well, I suppose every family needs someone who can fix a light switch." Grant laughed. Melissa looked down, and the trap began closing. Part 4. Richard kept pushing. "At Eleanor's age," he said, "she needs to understand the difference between a man who can fix a house and a man who can actually provide one." Tom's voice was quiet, careful. Richard leaned back. "Was that a threat?" "No," Tom said. "A courtesy." That was when the room changed. Richard did not like courtesy from a man he had already placed beneath him. Melissa tried to change the subject. "Mom, the ham is wonderful." I almost answered. That was the old habit in me. Smooth it over. Rescue the room. Let the insult pass. But I looked at Tom, and something in me refused. "Your father is insulting my fiancé," I said. Grant sighed. "Mom, nobody's insulting anybody." Tom turned to him. "Your father called me useless 5 minutes ago." "That was a joke." Tom asked, who was supposed to laugh. No one answered. Then Richard stopped pretending. "Eleanor," he said, "you are 64 years old. You live alone. You have a house, retirement accounts, insurance. You are exactly the kind of woman men target." I felt my face burn. "I am sitting right here," I said. Melissa touched the handbag beside her chair. Tom saw it, so did I. "What's in your bag?" I asked. "Nothing," she said too quickly. Richard sighed. "Since we're being dramatic, let's be honest." Melissa brought documents. Responsible documents. Any family would want these in place. My stomach turned. "What documents?" Grant said, "Power of attorney." Estate updates. Basic stuff. Basic stuff. At Christmas dinner. After my fiancé had been humiliated, while my grandchildren sat at the table, I looked at Melissa. Take them out. She hesitated, then removed a cream-colored folder and placed it beside her plate. The folder looked professional, clean, respectable. That made it worse. I opened it. A durable power of attorney. A healthcare directive. A trust amendment. A proposed change to my will. Yellow tabs marked where I was supposed to sign. Tom reached into his white envelope and placed one printed email in front of me. It was from Richard. The line was simple. Eleanor must not marry him before the revised documents are signed. I read it 3 times. Then I looked at Richard. You wrote this? He said. It's taken out of context. Tom said. There are 6 pages of context. Melissa covered her mouth. Grant stared at the table, and suddenly I understood. This dinner was never dinner. It was a planned intervention, and I was the target. Part 5. The documents were worse than I imagined. Point 1 clause said if I married Thomas Miller, my home would move into a family-controlled trust managed by Melissa and Grant. Another gave them broad oversight over financial decisions. Another removed Tom from medical decision-making completely. Then I found a page titled, Statement of Concern Regarding Undue Influence and Diminished Judgment. My hands went cold. The document suggested that my engagement, my estate planning, and my refusal to provide more financial help could indicate that I was being influenced by a romantic partner. A romantic partner. Not Tom. Not the man who drove me to doctor appointments, fixed my railing, brought me soup, and never asked for a dime. A symptom. I looked at Melissa. You were going to say I wasn't capable. No, Mom, she whispered. Grant said. It was just in case. In case of what? In case you refused to see reason. The room went silent. Even Richard looked annoyed that Grant had said it so clearly. There it was. If I signed, they would call it protection. If I refused, they would call it proof that I needed protection. Either way, my voice disappeared. Tom placed another paper on the table. A text from Grant to Melissa. If Dad can get her to see the guy is after her money, she'll sign. Don't let Tom get her alone after dinner. I looked at my son. His face had gone pale. Mom, he said, that came out wrong. How many wrong ways can the truth be taken? I asked. Richard stood. You are being emotional. That old sentence, the one used on women who are seeing too clearly. I stood too. I am not emotional, Richard. I am listening. Then Tom placed one more page before me. An email from Richard to Thomas Miller, dated months earlier. Richard had contacted Tom about an electrical compliance issue on a commercial project. The email began. Mr. Miller, I understand your firm has experience with municipal electrical infrastructure. My eyes lifted to Tom. Your firm? Tom sighed softly. I owned Miller Industrial Electric for 32 years. I sold most of it 4 years ago. I still consult. And I still take small jobs because I like working with my hands. Grant stared at him. Melissa looked stunned at Richard's face. Tightened. You knew? I said to Richard. You knew who he was. Richard said nothing. Tom said quietly, he knew. And he still called me useless because he needed you to doubt me. The room became painfully quiet. I looked at my children, my ex-husband, the documents, the yellow tabs waiting for my signature. Then I closed the folder and placed my palm on top. No, I said. Melissa whispered. Mom, no. I will not sign these tonight. I will not sign them tomorrow. I will not sign anything drafted behind my back, presented at my Christmas table, and explained by the man who spent half my life making me doubt myself. Richard snapped. Don't be foolish. I looked at him. I said no. And for once, no one had anything clever to say. Part 6. Richard stepped toward me. Eleanor, sit down. It was the old tone. The husband tone. The command disguised as concern. For years, it had worked. Not that night. No, I said. I will not sit down because you told me to. Grant stood too. You're acting like we attacked you. I looked at the folder. You didn't attack me. You planned around me. Melissa started crying. Mom, we were scared. What were you scared of? I asked. That he would take everything. I nodded slowly. There it was, not my happiness. Not my safety. Everything, the house. The accounts. The imagined inheritance. Grant snapped. We wouldn't even have to have this conversation if you weren't letting some contractor move in on our inheritance. The room stopped breathing. Our inheritance. Not my retirement. Not my home. Not my life. Their inheritance.My granddaughter Sophie began to cry silently near the end of the table. She was old enough to understand that something ugly had happened, but too young to know where to put it. I looked at her and knew one thing clearly: if I stayed silent, she might one day believe women are supposed to swallow humiliation to keep a table peaceful. No, not another generation. I picked up the document about diminished judgment and folded it. Richard said, "What are you doing?" "Keeping evidence." I folded Grant's text too. Then Richard's email. Grant stepped forward. I looked at him. "Do not come closer." He stopped. Not because I shouted, because I meant it. I took out my phone and placed Caroline Mercer's contact on the table. "The morning after Christmas, I am calling my attorney. I'm bringing her every page in this folder, every email Tom has, and every detail of how this was presented to me." Melissa whispered, "Please don't make this legal." I looked at her. "You made it legal when you brought legal papers." Richard said, "You will regret this." I looked at the man I had once married. "I have many regrets, Richard. Standing up tonight will not be one of them." Then I turned to everyone. "Dinner is over." No one moved, so I repeated it. "Dinner is over. Gather your things." Melissa stared at me. "You're kicking us out." "I am ending a conversation that should never have happened in my home." Grant muttered, "So Tom wins." I looked at my son. "No, I win." One by one, they left the door. Richard turned back. "You're making a mistake." I stood beside Tom, the folder under my hand. "No," I said. "I made the mistake years ago when I taught all of you that hurting me had no consequences." The door closed. The house went silent. Then my knees weakened. Tom reached for me. I let him. Not because I was helpless, because I was human. Part 7. After they left, my house felt strange. The table was still covered with plates. The Christmas tree blinked in the corner. The ham had gone cold. Grant's napkin was on the floor. Melissa's wine glass still had a lipstick mark on it. Everything looked like Christmas. Nothing felt like Christmas. Tom brought me water and sat beside me. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "For what?" "For all of this." He shook his head. "People can misuse what you built. That doesn't make you responsible for the misuse." I looked at the table. I had built that table with birthdays, tuition payments, babysitting, forgiveness, casseroles, phone calls, and love. They had used it to corner me. Tom cleaned the kitchen while I sat there, too tired to move. He scraped plates, wrapped food, rinsed silverware, and put everything away without acting like a hero. A so-called useless man cleaning up after people who tried to take my home. Later, over coffee, I asked him, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" He knew what I meant: the emails, the suspicion, the fact that Richard had contacted him before. Tom looked down at his mug. "Because if I came to you and said your children and ex-husband were plotting against you, I would sound exactly like the man they accused me of being. I understood a controlling man would have used the information to isolate me." Tom had waited until I chose the truth myself. "I never lied to you," he said. "I told you I worked in electrical contracting and consulting. I just didn't want you to know my balance sheet before you knew me." That was the difference. Richard wore success like armor. Tom carried his quietly. The next morning, I called Caroline. Her assistant answered and asked, "Mrs. Whitman, are you safe?" The question almost broke me. No one in my family had asked me that. At 1:30, Tom drove me to Caroline's office. He sat beside me while I told her everything, then stepped out when she needed to speak to me privately. No protest, no wounded pride. Just respect. Caroline reviewed the documents and said, "Eleanor, you did the right thing by not signing." I had not realized how badly I needed to hear that. She explained that the documents were broad, inappropriate, and dangerous under those circumstances. The statement about diminished judgment concerned her most because it showed intent. So if I said no, I said. They were prepared to say my no didn't count. Caroline paused. "That is one possible interpretation." My chest tightened. But this time, I was not alone and not unprotected. Caroline made a plan. Change locks, change passwords, secure bank accounts, update medical directives, document everything to no family meetings without counseled, no legal discussions at home. Then she drafted a letter to Richard, Melissa, and Grant. All communication about my finances and legal affairs would go through her office. When the letter was sent, my phone exploded. "Melissa, Mom, why did I get a letter from your lawyer?" Grant, "You're treating us like criminals." Richard, "Call me before this goes further." I looked at the messages. Then I put the phone face down. For the first time in my life, their urgency did not become my emergency. Part 8. The next morning, Tom brought a locksmith that he called first. He asked. That mattered. For years, Melissa and Grant had keys. Richard's old key was still on a ring near the back door, forgotten but not harmless that I removed Richard's key first. The sound of it dropping into the trash was tiny, but inside me, it echoed. Then Melissa's, then Grant's. Those hurt more. A key can mean love. It can also become entitlement. After the locks were changed, I called the bank. I reset passwords, added verbal security, changed online access, and requested alerts for withdrawals over $500. The bank later confirmed there had been 3 failed login attempts the evening after Caroline's letter. I did not need to ask who. I documented it. That became my new rule. Do not argue. Do not accuse without proof. Document. Caroline also contacted the lawyer who had drafted the documents, Peter Lang. He claimed he believed Melissa and Grant were helping me because I had difficulty managing paperwork. I laughed when I read that I had managed a mortgage, a divorce, taxes, tuition, insurance claims, medical bills, and Richard's nonsense for decades. But suddenly, because I said no, I could not manage paperwork. Caroline requested every email, note, draft, and source of information. A few days later, Caroline called me. Peter Lang had sent over his records. Grant had written that I was unusually resistant. Melissa had written that I was very trusting and might be redirected away from the children and grandchildren. Richard wrote, Eleanor responds poorly to direct confrontation. Present this as a family protection plan. Keep the language gentle. That one hurt the most. Richard knew me, not loved me. Knew me. He knew I hated conflict. He knew I would do almost anything to keep peace in front of the grandchildren. He knew which words made me feel guilty, and he had used that knowledge like a map. Another email from Grant said, Mom never reads legal stuff carefully if Melissa explains it emotionally. We just need the signing tabs marked. I sat in Caroline's office staring at that sentence. I remembered helping Grant with homework when he was 8, telling him, we'll go slowly. You're smart. Now my patience had become a weakness in his mind. Caroline asked what I wanted. I don't want revenge, I said. I want to be safe. I want my documents clean. And I want my children to know I've seen this. So we scheduled a meeting, Melissa and Grant only. Not Richard. Richard had had enough rooms. Part 9. The day after Christmas felt like a house waking up after a fire. Nothing was burning anymore, but the smell of smoke was still everywhere. The dishes had been washed. The candles were gone. The dining room looked clean again, but every chair still held a memory. Richard leaning back in my chair like he belonged there. Grant laughing when I asked questions. Melissa clutching her handbag while pretending she was concerned. And those papers spread across my table like my life had already been divided. I woke before sunrise and sat alone in the kitchen with cold coffee in my hands. Tom's envelope rested beside me, along with the folder Melissa had brought on Christmas Eve that I had spent most of the night writing questions on a yellow legal pad. Could my son still access my accounts? Could my old will be challenged? Could they claim I wasn't capable of making decisions anymore? That last question stayed with me the longest. Because once your own children begin questioning your mind, you realize they are no longer speaking to you like family. They are speaking about you like a problem to solve. At 9 o'clock, I called my attorney, Caroline Mercer. I expected voicemail because of the holiday week, but her assistant answered immediately. The moment I explained that something had happened during Christmas dinner, her tone changed. Then she asked me a question no one in my family had asked. Mrs. Whitman, are you safe? I closed my eyes when she said that, because Richard had called me dramatic. Melissa said I was overreacting. Grant told me we needed to be reasonable. But a stranger heard my voice for 30 seconds and asked if I was safe. Yes, I told her quietly. I'm safe. She gave me an appointment for that afternoon and told me to bring everything. After I hung up, the situation finally became real, not family drama, not hurt feelings evidenced. At 11, Tom arrived with a locksmith. He didn't pressure me. He asked permission first. Ellie, he said gently, you don't have to do this today. But they had access to your home, your files, your keys. I looked toward the hook beside the back door. Point three spare keys still hung there. Point one for Melissa, point one for Grant, and one Richard had kept years ago that I had simply never removed. That's how control survives, quietly, long after love is gone. The locksmith changed every exterior lock while I stood in the hallway holding the old keys in my hand. I threw Richard's away first. The sound it made hitting the trash can was tiny, but inside me, it sounded enormous. Melissa's key came next, then Grant's. Those hurt the most, because I remembered the moments I gave them those keys. Come anytime, I had told Melissa after Sophie was born. "I'll always check on you, Mom," Grant promised after my surgery. A key can mean trust. Until someone starts believing access is ownership. By noon, the locks were changed. For the first time in years, the house felt quiet in a different way. Not lonely, protected. That afternoon, Tom drove me downtown to Caroline Mercer's office. I wore my cream wool coat, the one Richard always hated because he said it drew attention. And for the first time in a very long while, I realized how much of my life I had spent shrinking myself to make other people comfortable. Caroline listened to everything. Christmas dinner, the insults, the documents, the comments about my judgment. Richard's involvement, Grant admitting they had already spoken to a lawyer. She read every page carefully before finally looking up at me. "Eleanor," she said calmly, "you absolutely did the right thing by refusing to sign." I didn't realize how badly I needed to hear that until my chest almost gave out from relief. Then her expression hardened slightly. "What concerns me most," she continued, "is the language questioning your mental capacity." I felt cold all over again. Caroline explained that documents like those could create a legal record, a foundation, something people use later to argue that an older woman can no longer make her own decisions. So if I refused, I whispered, they were prepared to say my refusal didn't matter. Caroline didn't dramatize it. She simply nodded once, and somehow that calmness made it more frightening. Tom handed her the emails Richard had sent him months earlier. Proof Richard had been speaking behind my back long before Christmas Eve. Proof this had not been spontaneous concern that it had been planned. Caroline reviewed everything in silence before finally saying, "We need to secure your legal and financial position immediately." Those words steadied me, because suddenly there was structure again. Steps, protection, control returning piece by piece. She told me to change all passwords, freeze unauthorized access, update my will and medical directives, document every interaction moving forward. Then she asked Tom to step outside for part of the meeting, and he did, without argument, without offense. That mattered more than I can explain. Because controlling men insist on staying. Kind men trust you enough to leave the room. Once we were alone, Caroline asked me something unexpected. "Do you want to marry Mr. Miller?" My eyes filled before I could stop them. "Yes," I admitted softly. "Why?" I looked toward the office window for a long moment before answering. "Because when he looks at me," I said quietly, "I don't feel managed. I feel seen." Caroline wrote something down and smiled faintly. "That matters," she said. And somehow, hearing another woman say that made me believe it too. Before we left, Caroline drafted a formal letter to Richard, Melissa, and Grant that stated clearly that all future discussions about my finances or estate would go through her office. In no more surprise documents, in no more pressure, in no more family ambushes disguised as concern. When she finished reading it aloud, I felt taller somehow. Not stronger because I wanted revenge, stronger because I finally understood I was allowed to protect myself. She sent the letter immediately. By the time Tom and I reached the parking garage, my phone was exploding with calls and messages. Melissa first. "Mom, are you seriously involving lawyers?" Then Grant. "This is insane. We're your family." And finally Richard. "You've embarrassed yourself," he wrote. "Call me before this goes any further." I stared at his message for a long moment. Then I handed the phone to Tom that he read it quietly before asking, "What do you want to do?" For the first time since Christmas Eve, the answer came easily. "Nothing," I said. And that was exactly what I did. Nothing. I put the phone back into my purse. I climbed into Tom's truck. And as we drove through the cold Cleveland afternoon, I realized something important. Richard had been wrong. I had not embarrassed myself. I had embarrassed the lie. And the lie was finally starting to panic. Part 10 outside Caroline's office. Richard was waiting near his car. Of course he crossed the street in his dark coat and red scarf. looking first at Tom, then at me. So, he said, you held court without me. No, Richard, I said. I had a meeting about my life without inviting the man who tried to manage it. His eyes narrowed. You sound proud of yourself. I am. That startled him. He looked at Tom. You must feel satisfied. You got what you wanted. Tom's voice stayed calm. What do you think I wanted? Richard smiled coldly. The house. The money. The pleasure of turning an aging woman against her family. Aging woman. Once, that would have wounded me. Now it sounded small. Tom looked almost sad. Richard, he said, I've built substations in ice storms, rewired hospitals during emergency shutdowns, and signed payroll checks for men who worked harder in one day than you have in most boardrooms. I don't need Eleanor's house to feel like a man. Richard's face reddened. Tom continued, and I didn't turn her against anyone. You did that with a folder and a dinner speech. For once, Richard had no answer. I stepped beside Tom. Do not contact me again unless it goes through Caroline. Richard looked at me with contempt. You really think this worker can protect you? I smiled. You still don't understand. Tom didn't protect me from you. He reminded me I could protect myself. That hurt him, not because it insulted him, because it removed him from the center. Later that day, I forwarded Caroline a note about Richard approaching me outside her office. She added it to the file. Everything became part of the record now, and more private intimidation hidden behind family language. Over the next weeks, Melissa tried. Awkwardly, she sent messages that did not ask for money or access. Mom, I hope your appointment went well. No need to reply. Sophie asked if she can call you this weekend. Only if you're comfortable. Slowly, I allowed phone calls with the grandchildren. One Sunday, Sophie came over and we baked oatmeal cookies. While stirring the dough, she asked, Grandma, were you scared that night? Yes, I said. You didn't look scared. I've had practice. She was quiet. Then she asked, do you still love Mom and Uncle Grant? Yes. Then why can't everything go back? I sat across from her. Because love is not a time machine. It cannot take us back before the hurt. It can only help us build something safer after. She nodded slowly. I hoped she would remember that point one day. Someone might tell her love means tolerating disrespect. And I wanted my voice in her memory saying no. Part 11. While Melissa slowly tried to repair what she had broken, Grant stayed silent much longer. For nearly a month, he sent only stiff, practical emails. A coat he left at my house. Boxes in the basement. Whether I planned to attend a school program. Then one night, he sent a message at 1:13 a.m. Mom, I don't know how to say this without making it worse. I was angry because I thought Tom was replacing us. Then I was angry because the money felt uncertain. Then I was angry because you stopped acting like the version of Mom I knew how to deal with. None of that excuses what I did. I went through your files. I helped with the documents. I laughed when Dad insulted Tom. I'm ashamed. I don't expect you to forgive me now. I just wanted to say it without Dad involved. I read it 3 times. Tom read it too. That's more honest, he said. It doesn't erase it. No, he said. But it doesn't mean nothing. The next morning, I replied, I received your message. I appreciate that you named what you did. I need consistency before I can rebuild trust. We can begin with coffee in a public place next week. If you come alone and do not discuss money. He answered within 10 minutes. Yes. Alone. No money. We met at a small cafe near my doctor's office. I arrived first and chose a seat with my back to the wall. That may sound excessive to someone whose family has never turned a table into a trap. To me, it was peace. Grant came in looking uncertain. For a while, we talked about weather and coffee. Then he said, I started seeing a therapist. I looked up. Melissa suggested it. I almost hung up on her. But you went. Yeah. He stared at his cup. She asked me why I thought your house was mine before you were gone. That sentence moved through me slowly. I didn't have a good answer, he said. That was when I believed there might be hope. Not because he apologized again, because he had found a question big enough to humble him. Weeks later, Grant apologized to Tom at Tom's workshop, with me present. I was wrong about you, Grant said. I judged you because I thought your work made you less than my father. It doesn't. And I helped put my mother in a terrible position. I'm sorry. Tom wiped his hands on a rag. Thank you, he said. Your mother deserved better from you. Grant looked at me. I know. That was enough for that day. Not forgiveness. Not trust fully restored. Enough. In April, Caroline finalized my estate plan that them.While grandchildren's education funds were protected. A portion would go to charity. Melissa and Grant were not disinherited, but they were no longer in control of anything. Richard had no role, no access, no authority. When I signed the final page, Caroline said, "Congratulations, Eleanor. Your papers match your wishes now." At 64, that felt like a second birth. Part 12. Tom and I married in June. Not in a ballroom. Not with 100 guests. That we chose a small garden near Lake Erie. I wore a pale blue dress. Tom wore a gray suit and polished work boots. When I teased him about the boots, he shrugged. "I want to stand in something honest." Mrs. Alvarez came. Caroline came too, which made me laugh because she had seen more of our paperwork than anyone. Sophie cried before the ceremony even began. Melissa came without Brian. She sat in the second row, hands folded tightly in her lap. When I walked past, she whispered, "You look beautiful, Mom." This time, I believe she meant it without needing anything. Grant came too. At first, he stood in the back, unsure whether he had earned a closer seat. Tom quietly pointed to an empty chair beside Melissa. Grant Saturday. Richard was not invited, and one asked why. That was one of the greatest gifts of the day. During the vows, Tom did not promise to protect me like I was fragile. He promised to walk beside me, tell me the truth, and respect my no as much as my yes. When it was my turn, I promised to stop confusing peace with silence. Afterward, Sophie raised a glass of lemonade. "To Grandma and Tom," she said, "for reminding us that love should make people bigger, not smaller." Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Melissa began to see our why the next Christmas, everything was different. Not perfect. Different that I did not host the old dinner, that I invited only those who could respect the new rules. Melissa came with the children for Christmas Eve brunch. She brought cinnamon rolls and asked before putting them in my oven. That small question made me smile. Grant came the next afternoon with a crooked wooden birdhouse he had made in a class his therapist suggested. Tom said it had character. Grant laughed for the first time in my house without cruelty attached to it. Richard sent a Christmas card. Inside, he wrote only, "I hope you are well." I looked at it for a long moment. Then I placed it in the recycling bin, not with anger, with completion. That evening, Tom and I sat beside a smaller Christmas tree. Fewer ornaments. Only the ones I chose to hang. Grant's popsicle stick sled was still there. Melissa's painted angel too that I had not thrown away the past, that I had only stopped letting it excuse the present. A year earlier, Richard had called Tom useless, and my children had laughed. They thought usefulness meant status, polish, money, titles, and the ability to impress strangers. They were wrong. Useful was the man who stayed calm while others exposed themselves. Useful was the attorney who turned chaos into protection. Useful was the granddaughter who learned that love without respect is not love enough. And useful was the mother who finally stopped offering herself as the price of family unity. I still love my children, but I love them differently now, not less. More honestly, I no longer confuse being needed with being valued, I no longer mistake access for closeness, I no longer believe keeping a family together requires one woman to be quietly taken apart. At 64, I learned that dignity does not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it arrives as a new locked, a changed password, and signed document, a phone placed face down on a table, a calm voice saying no, and sometimes it arrives as a man in polished work boots, smiling across a Christmas table because he already knows the truth. Richard once asked what Tom was good for. I could answer that now in 100 ways. But the simplest answer is this: Tom reminded me that I was never useless either.